mean, honestly, but that raises so many other interesting questions. And today, I was just confessing to you before we went on that I tried to watch your debate with Paul Krugman on Democracy Now, and I couldn't get through most of it because, frankly, it wasn't. I was actually I'm surprised to hear myself say this. I was expecting and hoping for more from Krugman, so it was interesting, other than just socialism is a controversial word, which seemed to be the kind of main thrust of the argument. But you were, and I want to set this clip up. I want to play this clip from the debate. You were setting up a couple of themes that we've talked about on this show and talked about with you specifically. One, the bigger one is the socialism word getting destigmatized. Another, which is actually, once it becomes destigmatized, becoming a much more sophisticated about how we talk about socialism and the different brands of socialism. And I want to talk in the post game about, because the new thing with to try to demonize Bernie is, common sense comments he's made about the success of the Cuban government, as an example. But the different schools of socialism. Is socialism about having a big empowered government that fights back and controls corporations? Yes, in certain traditions. Or is it about actually moving to a genuinely post-capitalist, post-governmental world? What does that even look like from the perspective of labor, economics, and cooperative economics? Really, really interesting questions. And I thought what was striking, and immediately when I thought of in your debate with Krugman, Krugman was just there to basically say the socialism word has no political upside, and Bernie isn't even really a socialist. He's just a good progressive who I like. Maybe I'm kind of pretending to get acclimated to, and Denmark is lovely. And you said no, he is actually a socialist. He does represent a certain socialist tradition, and I'd like you to touch on that. But I thought that this really did actually come through at this moment in the debate, which maybe. Correct me if I'm wrong, because maybe I'm projecting too much of my ideology on this. This moment with Mike Bloomberg, he didn't just say, hey, Mike, it's wrong that you have this much when so many people are suffering. He did say that. But he said something about how Bloomberg got what he got that I don't think you're going to hear from pretty much any other candidate or anybody that doesn't at least have a somewhat socialistic understanding of how wealth is created. So all that being said, let's play that, and then I'd like you to respond to that and maybe reflect on it in light of your debate. And I guess turn up the speaker. All right.
Mayor Bloomberg, should you exist?
I can't speak for all billionaires. All I know is I've been very lucky, made a lot of money, and I'm giving it all away to make this country better. And a good chunk of it goes to the Democratic Party as well.
Is it too much? Have you earned too much money? Has it been an obscene amount of... Should you have earned that much money?
Yes, I worked very hard for it, and I'm giving it away.
Thank you, Halleck.
What is the part, though, that still goes on, right? Okay, we need Bernie's response to this.
That's to me, right?
It is your policy.
Thank you. It is my policy, and I'm very proud of that policy. All right? What we need to...
They're either talking about the wealth tax or the corporate board stuff.
Right, and the corporate board stuff was significant. Yeah, all right.
To deal with this grotesque level of income and wealth inequality is make sure that those people who are working, you know what, Mr. Bloomberg, wasn't you who made all that money. Maybe your workers played some role in that as well.
Look at Bloomberg.
It's important that those workers are able to share the benefits. Also, when we have so many people who go to work every day and they feel not good about their jobs. They feel like cogs in a machine. I want workers to be able to sit on corporate boards as well so they can have some say over what happens to their lives.
And all Bloomberg had in response was, this will just help Donald Trump. But I just want to outline this really clearly because, okay, we have that this is immoral and grotesque. Absolutely. I think actually pretty much everybody who isn't, completely demented at this point would have buy-in on that. But then we have, how did the wealth actually get created? Maybe your workers have something to do with it. And then we had alienation. It wasn't just a policy about being on this corporate board. It was people feel terrible in these jobs. To me, that is actually a very clear expression of some type of democratic socialism coming through.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know where to start. There's so much.
On Krugman, in case we come back to it.
Please.
He was extraordinarily nervous. I could not understand why. He seemed nervous before we went on before the camera, and he was nervous throughout. He was uncomfortable defending his position, and he was kind of weak at it. I've seen him in other circumstances where he's more aggressive and stronger. He either didn't expect what he got there, or he doesn't have this all worked out. To be fair to him, he's part of an entire generation. I am too. But he's part of the mainstream, and I'm not. And what that means is he decided as a young man in graduate school, learning to be an economist, and he and I went to the same basic schools, which is why he knows who I am and all the rest. He made a decision that most made, which is to stay as far away from Marxism and socialism as you could get. There's no percentage in it. Nobody wanted to hear it. But we're talking the Cold War here, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. It was not good for your career to show the slightest interest other than a dismissive, back-of-the-hand approach. So to be blunt, they don't know much about this subject. It's not because they aren't smart. They are smart. It's not because they don't have the capability. They do. But this was something not to get near, and so the result is what you get if you don't get near something. They don't really know. So he's able to say, big mistake right at the beginning, Bernie's not a real socialist, as if there is such a thing. I make a little fun of him. I say, where's the agency that gives certificates as to who's real and not? There's no government does that. No private.
Maybe we should do that on the show. Actually, that'd be interesting. You think we could do that? We could do a certification.
Give a certificate. People might really go for that.
All right.
I try to explain that from the beginning of socialism in the early part of the 19th century, people have disagreed about what socialism is among the socialists. They've always disagreed. They've always been. In the heat of argument, one calls the other not genuine, but we kind of understand it's a tradition with multiples. And in that tradition of multiple interpretations, Bernie Sanders occupies a very well-trodden path. That is one kind of socialism. You leave enterprise in the hands of private capitalists, but you regulate them and you tax them in order to soften the hard edges of capitalism, by which I mean extreme inequality, the instability of business cycles, all of that, and the government comes in and moderates all of that. That's a kind of socialism. Nobody has any right to deny that. Most of the Western European socialist countries with their socialist parties and socialist newspapers believe that. And that's enough evidence to say that's a kind of socialism, and nobody has any standing to judge this right or wrong, real or unreal. And it's less that he's polemic here. He just doesn't know, and you could see he became unclear because it's a pool in which he's never swum, and he doesn't know where the eddies are, and he's smart enough to keep himself away from that. But you're going to see a lot of confusion around this by people who don't know. Chris Matthews on the MSNBC.
Would you like to play some Chris Matthews? Would you enjoy watching some Chris Matthews?
So he's got socialism and communism confused. Now, the distinction between those was established when the communist parties around the world were formed in the immediate aftermath of World War I, so roughly 100 years ago.
What led to that distinction?
It was all about the Soviet Union. Remember that the Soviet Revolution in 1917 was the first time that socialists had gone beyond being an opposition party, being a movement, being a radical organization, and had taken state power. What this did was gave the Russian socialists a level of prestige that isn't hard to understand. They did it. Nobody else had done it, at least not yet. And so, in a sense, I'm making it simple, but the global socialist movement split. Those who felt the Russians had found the way and they should be followed decided to demand that kind of loyalty to Russia and support be part of basic socialism. Other socialists didn't agree. They thought there were many things the Russians did that were good, but there were many things. Remember, this is the late teens, early 20s of the last century, that there were many things they already didn't like and didn't agree with. And so there was a split. And those who went with the Soviet Union changed their name. We're no longer socialists. We call ourselves communists, whereas the others didn't agree. And one of the key points, and the one that is durable for the next 100 years to our present, is that communists say, you socialists are self-deluded. You think the government can come in and manage this, but it can't. If you still have capitalist enterprises, the wealth is concentrated in their hands, and they're not stupid. They're not going to allow a government to function that threatens their situation, and they will go to work to undermine your regulation, to evade it, to weaken it, and eventually to repeal it. For example, Glass-Steagall. You have a regulation, you don't like it. For 30 years, you evade it. For the next 15 years, you weaken it. And with Bill Clinton's signature, you get rid of it. Right. And that this is the model and leads the communists to say the only way forward in this situation is for the government to take over the ownership and operation. To confuse Bernie, who's only the socialist of the first kind, who has never in his adult life, and I've known him for years, advocated the communist solution. It's not an adjustment these days. That's not who he is, not who he's ever been. That is either ignorance or just malevolent hostility, fear-mongering, because it doesn't recognize either the old socialist tradition or the communist breakaway.
But he is open in some ways, and I think a part of his legacy that to me is fascinating, because I actually think, talking in electoral terms, obviously there's going to be some older voters that you need to get that are scared of that word, Absolutely. And we have to deal with it. But to me, Bernie, as far as I understand, particularly when he's mayor of Burlington, and he does have this worker on the board idea, and I think that is not, it's certainly not revolutionary communism, obviously, but it's also not necessarily just sort of, a kind of regulate and tax redistribution. It's a model that I think is not as comprehensive as what you put forward, but I think it starts to tip in that direction of, well, okay, these enterprises are not existing as either private or public sovereigns. They have to become sort of democratized social entities. And so when he put forward, I remember last summer when he put forward that worker board plan, and I looked back at some of the things that he had promoted successfully as mayor of Burlington around housing ownership and land trusts and things like that. That shows me that he's very open to this thread, which not only to me is more radical and exciting from the perspective of my politics, I think ironically it's actually very electorally appealing, because you can talk to plenty of folks who might not feel comfortable with that terminology, but they sure as hell might know what a community bank is or a land trust or those types of things.
Let me give a response on that and a couple other things that are related. Bernie gets that idea from Germany, because Germany is the best example we have of both the political appeal and the economic realization one can have around workers on the board. Germany has for decades had a law which says any company that has 2,000 or more workers has to basically put just below 1/2 of the board of directors are elected by the workers. In German, it's called Mitbestimmung. And what that means is determination with. And Mitbestimmung means the workers are with the decision makers. They have a determining voice. Now, they're outvoted slightly. So, yes, the capitalists hold control. But they have to inform workers know about what the plans of a company are long before they do here in this country. They understand the strategic. They can be a control over the books. There's all kinds of real valuable power. Now, the socialists pushed that in Europe, in Germany. The socialists won it. But so successful was it, so popular, that the conservatives, in and out of power, leave it alone. They can't undo it because it would be an eruption. Look, the current leader in France, give you an idea, wants to take away the pensions that the socialists have fought for. And he has a general strike on his hand, and his popularity numbers, are half of those of Mr. Trump. So, I mean, he's a bit of a clown, but then again, clowns are now what we have.
Clowns are ubiquitous.
Number one. Number two, the advice of Mr. Krugman, Professor Krugman, or Dr. Krugman, or whatever. His advice was lose the socialism.
That's funny to me.
Right? Lose the socialist name.
Yes.
An advice all kinds of centrists are giving.
Yes.
Now, it strikes me you have to be extraordinarily dense to give that piece of advice when you're talking about Bernie Sanders. This is a fellow from Brooklyn, a classic left-wing leading young socialist who leaves Brooklyn and moves to Burlington, Vermont, from the major city to a very small city out in the middle of nowhere near the Canadian border. Okay. But he holds on to his social. He's a little socialist. And as a socialist, he becomes active and known in Burlington. He eventually gets on the city council as a socialist. He then runs for mayor as a socialist. Then he runs for Congress as a socialist. Then he runs for Senate as a socialist. And now he's the front runner for president. He did all of that with the socialist name. Why in the world would he get rid of it? It's his horse. It's how he got here. That's the advice of a person who doesn't understand anything that happened here, who lives in a world of polling, whereas Mr. Sanders is a real winner riding the horse of socialism in a state that has lots of older people, lots of people that were scared by the Cold War, lots of people with an individualist, rural, all the things that you're supposed to worry about will never be. They love Bernie up there.
Can we actually play? And I want to say it's even more impressive because he didn't. I believe he was not even on the city council. He went straight to mayor.
Really?
He ran multiple statewide races, which he lost by massive margins by, and they saw a path to him becoming mayor, and he won as an independent, self-proclaimed socialist. By the way, and people should take note, doing things that he's absolutely going to need to do, like, running against the developers and the gentrifiers, and also getting the patrolmen's union because the police were getting their wages messed around with. And that was very savvy of him. You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.